Jacob Lawson thought he had a stable life as a hard-working father, devoted husband, and loving family man in suburban Denver. But when subtle changes in his wife Abby's behavior spark suspicion, his world begins to unravel. A shocking betrayal is revealed, throwing Jacob into a battle to protect his daughter Lily while navigating a storm of emotional and legal turmoil. As tensions rise and secrets come to light, Jacob is forced to confront difficult truths and fight for what matters most. How far will he go to safeguard his family? Watch the story unfold in this gripping tale of love, betrayal, and resilience. Jacob Lawson's life was simple. He was a middle-aged mechanic living in suburban Denver, Colorado, with his wife Abby and their teenage daughter, Lily. Jacob didn't ask for much from life. He loved his family and took pride in his job at the local repair shop. While money was always tight, he believed they had what mattered most: each other. Jacob spent most evenings in his garage, working on a beat-up classic car he'd been restoring for years. Abby often teased him about it, calling it his other love. But deep down, he thought she admired his dedication. She was the glue of their little family, always buzzing with energy, handling the bills, grocery runs, and everything else that came with managing a household. Lily, their 16-year-old, was glued to her phone more often than not, but she was a good kid, sharp, funny, and sarcastic in the way teenagers often are. Jacob liked to think they were a solid team. Sure, they had their disagreements. Money. Mostly Abby would get frustrated when Jacob took on extra hours at work, but still insisted on pouring money into his car project. He'd counter that it was his way of staying sane, and she'd roll her eyes before changing the subject. They always moved on. That's how marriage worked, right? It wasn't until recently that Jacob started noticing the subtle shifts in Abby. At first, it was little things. She started staying up later than usual, claiming she had work emails to catch up on. She'd been glued to her phone more often, laughing at something she never shared with him. She stopped complaining about his long hours too, which should have been a relief, but left him uneasy. Instead, Abby wasn't one to keep quiet about things that bothered her. Jacob brushed it off, convincing himself that he was overthinking. Abby was probably just stressed. Her job as a realtor had been demanding lately, with the market booming and clients calling her at all hours. It made sense that she'd need a bit of downtime scrolling through her phone or watching TV. Still, the feeling nagged at him, like a rock in his shoe he couldn't shake out. One evening, they sat at the dinner table. Lily had gone to a friend's house, leaving Jacob and Abby alone. It had been a while since they'd shared a meal together without distractions. Jacob thought about bringing up how distant she'd seemed, but decided against it. He wasn't great at those kinds of conversations, and Abby looked tired. Instead, he complimented her cooking, and she gave him a distracted smile. Her mind was somewhere else. Jacob and Abby's story started 18 years earlier. They'd met in college, where Jacob was the quiet, dependable type, and Abby was full of life and ambition. She had a way of lighting up a room, and Jacob couldn't believe someone like her wanted to be with someone like him. They balanced each other out, and for years, their love had been the foundation of everything they built. But love doesn't always fade in dramatic fashion. Sometimes, it erodes slowly, with neither person noticing until the cracks become too wide to ignore. Lately, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing between them. He chalked it up to routine. After all, they'd been married nearly 2 decades. Life gets busy, and people drift. But even as he tried to rationalize it, his gut told him something was wrong. The first real sign came when Abby started dressing differently. She'd always been put together, but lately, she'd been making more effort. New outfits, hair appointments, even makeup on days when she wasn't meeting clients. Jacob complimented her, and she'd smile. But it felt like the compliments didn't land the way they used to. She was looking past him, not at him. One night, Jacob came home late from work to find Abby on the couch, her laptop open. She didn't hear him come in. He saw her smile, a soft, private smile he hadn't seen in years. She quickly closed the laptop when she noticed him. "Hey, you're home late," she said, her tone light, almost too casual. "Yeah, had to finish up a transmission job. What are you working on?" "Just emails," she said, avoiding his eyes. "You know how it is." Jacob nodded, but a chill ran through him. Abby wasn't a great liar, and he'd just caught her in one. He didn't press her, though he told himself there was no reason to jump to conclusions. Everyone deserves a little privacy. Maybe she was planning a surprise for him, or just needed a moment to herself, but the unease grew. The second sign came a week later. Jacob had been looking for a flashlight he'd left in the kitchen and accidentally opened Abby's purse. Inside, he noticed a receipt for a hotel restaurant across town. He didn't recognize the name, but the date on the receipt was from a night he'd worked late. His mind raced, trying to piece together a reasonable explanation. Maybe she'd had a work meeting or caught up with a friend. Still, the doubt crept in. Jacob decided to let it go. For now, he told himself he'd ask her about it later if it still bothered him, but deep down, he knew he wouldn't. The thought of confronting Abby, of hearing her explain the receipt, filled him with dread. What if there wasn't an innocent explanation? The final sign came on a Saturday morning Abby had left early, saying she had a house showing across town. Jacob was in the garage when Lily came in, holding her phone. "Dad, do you know who Mum's hanging out with today?" she asked, scrolling through her messages. "Just clients. I think why?" "I don't know," Lily said, frowning. "She's been acting weird. One of my friends said they saw her at the mall last week with some guy." Jacob felt his stomach drop. "What kind of guy?" "I don't know. Just some guy? Probably nothing. Never mind." Lily shrugged and walked off, but her words stuck with Jacob. He stood in the garage, staring at the car he'd poured years into restoring. For the first time, it didn't bring him the comfort it usually did. His world felt off-kilter, like a puzzle where the pieces didn't quite fit anymore. Jacob knew he couldn't keep brushing things aside. Something was happening, and he had to figure out what it was, before it was too late. Jacob couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something was happening right under his nose. Abby's behavior had changed so much in the last few months, and every new detail seemed to push him closer to a truth he wasn't ready to face. He decided he needed answers. The next Saturday, Abby told him she'd be out showing houses all afternoon. She kissed him on the cheek and left, her perfume lingering in the air long after she was gone. Normally, Jacob would have spent the day in the garage tinkering with his car, but today was different. He needed to know what was going on. He waited a few minutes, then grabbed his jacket and keys. He wasn't sure what he was going to do, but sitting around the house wasn't an option. He drove to the office where Abby worked, thinking maybe he could bump into her there. The parking lot was empty. He tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail. Jacob's chest tightened. His next thought was to drive by the restaurant from the receipt he'd found in her purse. It was a trendy place on the other side of town, not the kind of spot Abby usually visited. As he pulled into the lot, he scanned the cars, his pulse quickening. And then he saw it. Her car, parked near the entrance. Jacob sat in his truck, gripping the steering wheel. He stared at her car, his mind racing. Was she meeting a client, a friend, or someone else? Before he could talk himself out of it, he got out and walked toward the restaurant. His palms were sweating as he pushed open the door. Inside, the place was bustling with couples and small groups chatting over brunch. Jacob's eyes scanned the room, looking for Abby. And then he saw her, sitting at a corner table with a man he didn't recognize. They were leaning in close, talking and laughing. Abby looked happy. Happier than he'd seen her in months. Jacob stood frozen, his feet refusing to move. His heart felt like it had been ripped out of his chest. He wanted to march over to their table, to demand answers, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, he turned and walked out, the sound of their laughter echoing in his ears. Back in his truck, Jacob sat in silence, staring at the dashboard. He felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. But more than anything, he felt lost. The woman he'd shared his life with, the mother of his child, was sitting in a restaurant with another man, acting like Jacob didn't even exist. That night, Jacob didn't say anything to Abby. He couldn't. She came home smiling, carrying a bag of takeout, acting like everything was fine. She kissed him on the cheek, asked how his day was, and sat down to eat dinner with Lily. Jacob watched her, his appetite gone, wondering how she could pretend so easily. Over the next few days, Jacob became more withdrawn. He went through the motions at work, barely talking to his co-workers. At home, he avoided Abby as much as possible, unsure how to confront her. Every time he thought about that moment in the restaurant, he felt like he was drowning. He didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was clear. Abby was cheating. One evening, Jacob decided he couldn't keep this to himself any longer. He called his best friend, Mark, a no-nonsense guy who had been his confidant since college. They met at a local bar, and Jacob spilled everything. Abby's late nights, the receipt, the restaurant. Mark listened carefully, sipping his beer. When Jacob finished, Mark shook his head. "Man, that's tough, I'm sorry, Jake, but you need to confront her. You can't let this eat you up inside." Jacob nodded, but the thought of confronting Abby made his stomach turn. What if she denied it? Or worse, what if she admitted it? "Look," Mark said, leaning in. "If it were me, I'd want proof. Something concrete. If you're wrong, you'll never forgive yourself for accusing her. But if you're right, at least you'll know for sure." That night, Jacob lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Mark's words echoed in his mind. Proof. He needed proof. The next weekend, Abby told him she had another showing across town. This time, Jacob didn't wait for her to leave. He called a private investigator, someone Mark had recommended, and explained the situation. The investigator was professional and understanding, assuring Jacob that he'd get to the bottom of it. For the next week, Jacob barely slept. The investigator sent updates. Photos of Abby meeting the same man from the restaurant, the two of them walking through a park. Holding hands, Jacob felt sick to his stomach every time he looked at the photos. There was no denying it now. When the investigator finally delivered a full report, Jacob sat alone in the garage, staring at the file. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just sat there, numb. This was it. The proof he needed. But it didn't make him feel any better. If anything, it made everything worse. That evening, Jacob decided it was time to confront Abby. He waited until Lily was asleep, then asked Abby to sit with him in the living room. She seemed surprised, but didn't argue. "Abby?" he began, his voice trembling. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." Abby frowned, setting her phone down. "Of course, what's going on? Are you seeing someone else?" Abby's eyes widened, and for a moment, Jacob thought she might deny it, but then she looked away, her face crumpling. "Jacob, She took a deep breath. "Yes, I am." The words hit Jacob like a punch to the gut. He leaned back in his chair, struggling to breathe. He had prepared himself for this moment, but hearing her say it out loud made it all too real. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this to us, to Lily?" Abby's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean for it to happen, I swear, Jacob. I never wanted to hurt you. But I've been so unhappy. For years, I felt like we're just going through the motions, like we're roommates, not a couple. And then I met Greg, and he made me feel alive again. Jacob shook his head, his anger bubbling to the surface. Alive. You think this is some excuse to blow up our family? What about Lily? What about everything we've built together? Abby wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say. I didn't plan for this, but it happened. And I'm sorry. Jacob stood up, pacing the room. He felt like he was going to explode. Sorry. Sorry doesn't cut it, Abby. Do you even want to fix this? Or is it already over? Abby hesitated, and that hesitation told Jacob everything he needed to know. He felt his heart break all over again. Remember, if you're hooked by this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible tales. Your support keeps the stories coming. Jacob stared at Abby, his mind reeling from her confession. Every word she'd said felt like another knife twisting in his chest. But even as the pain and anger coursed through him, another emotion began to take over. Resolve. This wasn't just about their marriage anymore. It was about his daughter, his future, and his dignity. He wasn't going to let this betrayal define him. For the next few days, Jacob kept his distance. Abby, to her credit, tried to keep things civil, but there was no ignoring the tension between them. Lily, sharp as ever, picked up on it immediately. One night, as Jacob was fixing himself a sandwich in the kitchen, she approached him. Dad, is everything okay with you and Mom? She asked, her voice hesitant. Jacob froze. He wanted to protect her from the truth, but he couldn't bring himself to lie. Things are complicated right now, kiddo, but don't worry. No matter what happens, I'm here for you. Lily nodded, though her concern was evident. Okay, just don't shut me out. Okay, I can handle more than you think. Jacob smiled at her, a bittersweet feeling washing over him. His daughter was growing up faster than he wanted, and she deserved better than this mess. The next morning, Jacob made a decision. He contacted his lawyer, the same one who had helped his friend Mark through a tough divorce. He didn't want to drag things out, but he also wasn't going to let Abby walk away without consequences. They scheduled a meeting for the following week to discuss his options. Meanwhile, Jacob started making changes at home. He began keeping detailed records of his finances, ensuring that Abby wouldn't have any surprises for him later. He also started looking into custody arrangements. The idea of not seeing Lily every day was unbearable, but he was determined to fight for as much time with her as possible. One evening, as Jacob was going through some paperwork in the living room, Abby walked in. She looked hesitant, almost guilty. Jacob, can we talk? She asked. He sighed, setting down his pen. What is it, Abby? I've been thinking, maybe we should try counseling for Lily's sake, if nothing else, she said, her voice wavering. Jacob studied her face. He wanted to believe she was sincere, but he couldn't shake the image of her with Greg. Counseling? He repeated. You think talking to a stranger is going to fix this? I don't know, Abby admitted. But we owe it to ourselves to try, don't we? To try for her? Jacob's jaw tightened. You're asking me to pretend everything's fine, to sit in a room and talk about feelings, while you're still seeing him? Abby looked down, guilt flashing across her face. I'm not seeing him anymore, I ended it. Did you? Jacob asked, his voice sharp. Or are you just saying that to ease your conscience? She didn't answer, and that silence was all Jacob needed to hear. He stood up, his heart pounding. You made your choice, Abby. Now I'm making mine. The conversation ended there, with Abby retreating to the bedroom and Jacob spending another sleepless night on the couch. But as painful as it was, Jacob felt a strange sense of clarity. He knew what he had to do. The next week was a whirlwind. Jacob met with his lawyer and laid everything out. The affair, the tension at home, his desire to protect Lily. The lawyer listened carefully, nodding as Jacob spoke. "We'll file for divorce," the lawyer said. "And given the circumstances, we'll push for primary custody. It won't be easy. But with the evidence you have, we've got a strong case." Jacob felt a mix of relief and dread. He didn't want to drag Lily through a bitter legal battle, but he couldn't let Abby's choices dictate their future. He had to stand up for himself, and for Lily. Then came the moment Jacob had been dreading: serving Abby the divorce papers. He waited until Lily was at school, not wanting her to witness the confrontation. When Abby came home that afternoon, he handed her the envelope without a word. She opened it, her face paling as she read the contents. "You're divorcing me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What did you expect, Abby?" Jacob replied. "That I'd just forgive and forget, that we'd go back to playing house like nothing happened?" "I didn't think you'd give up on us so easily," she said, tears welling in her eyes. Jacob laughed bitterly. "Easily. Do you have any idea how hard this is for me? You destroyed everything we built, Abby. And now you want to play the victim?" Abby didn't respond. She simply dropped the papers on the counter and walked out of the room. Jacob watched her go, his chest aching. As much as he hated what she'd done, a part of him still mourned the life they'd shared. But there was no turning back now. Over the next few weeks, the tension in the house was unbearable. Abby alternated between anger and sadness, while Jacob focused on preparing for the custody battle. He spent as much time with Lily as possible, knowing that every moment counted. One night, as Jacob was tucking Lily into bed, she looked up at him with wide eyes. "Dad, are you and Mom getting a divorce?" Jacob's heart sank. He had hoped to shield her from the truth a little longer, but it seemed she had figured it out on her own. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said gently. "We are. But that doesn't mean I love you any less. That will never change." Lily nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Jacob held her close, vowing to do whatever it took to protect her. The legal proceedings began in earnest, with both sides presenting their cases. Jacob's lawyer was relentless, painting a clear picture of Abby's infidelity and the impact it had on their family. Abby's lawyer, in turn, tried to shift the focus to Jacob's long work hours and lack of involvement in Lily's day-to-day life. The courtroom battle was exhausting, but Jacob refused to give up. He knew he wasn't perfect, but he also knew he was a good father, and in the end, that was what mattered most. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the judge finally reached a decision. Jacob was awarded primary custody of Lily, with Abby granted visitation rights. It wasn't a perfect outcome, but it was a victory nonetheless. As Jacob and Lily walked out of the courthouse, hand in hand, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in months, he felt a glimmer of hope. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more stories. Like this one, your support means everything. Jacob thought the storm was finally starting to calm. With the court's decision in his favor, he could focus on rebuilding his life with Lily and leaving the chaos of the past behind. But as anyone who's been through a messy divorce knows, the battle doesn't end with the judge's gavel. Abby wasn't going down quietly. It started small. Missed visitation pickups, late-night texts filled with accusations, and attempts to guilt Jacob into reconsidering the custody arrangement. He tried to keep his responses measured, not wanting to escalate the situation. But every interaction with Abby felt like walking through a minefield. She was unpredictable, her emotions swinging wildly between regret and resentment. One evening, while Jacob was preparing dinner, Lily came into the kitchen, her face pale. She held her phone out to him. "Dad, you need to see this." Jacob took the phone and saw a social media post from Abby. It was a long, rambling message about how the legal system had failed her, how she'd been torn from her child by a vindictive ex-husband. She'd even included photos of Lily from years ago, painting a picture of a happy family that no longer existed. Jacob's blood boiled. Not because of what Abby had said about him, he'd expected that, but because she was using Lily as a pawn in her narrative. He immediately called his lawyer, who assured him they could address it legally if necessary. But the damage had been done. The post had already garnered dozens of comments from friends and family, many of them criticizing Jacob without knowing the full story. Later that night, as Jacob sat with Lily in the living room, she spoke up. "Do you think Mom's okay?" The question caught Jacob off guard. "What do you mean?" "She's just different lately. Angry all the time. I don't think she's happy," Lily said softly. Jacob sighed. "Your mom's going through a lot right now. That doesn't excuse her behavior, but it's not your job to fix her." Lily nodded, but the worry in her eyes didn't fade. The tension came to a head. One Saturday afternoon, Abby was supposed to pick Lily up for a scheduled visit, but an hour passed with no sign of her. Jacob called and texted, but Abby didn't respond. Frustrated, he finally told Lily to grab her shoes. They'd go out for ice cream instead. Just as they were heading for the door, Abby's car screeched into the driveway. Abby stumbled out, clearly intoxicated. Her hair was disheveled, and her makeup was smeared. "Where's Lily?" she slurred, her voice loud enough to draw the neighbors' attention. Jacob stepped outside, keeping his voice calm but firm. "Abby, you're not in any condition to take her right now. Go home and sleep it off." "I'm her mother," Abby shouted, swaying on her feet. "You don't get to tell me what I can and can't do." Lily peeked out from behind the door, her eyes wide with fear. "Mom?" Jacob moved to block Lily's view. "Go back inside, sweetie, I'll handle this." Abby's face crumpled as she saw Lily retreating. "You're turning her against me," she sobbed. "You always were so good at making me the bad guy." "I'm not doing anything, Abby," Jacob said, his patience fraying. "You're doing this to yourself." The confrontation ended with Abby storming off, leaving Jacob to pick up the pieces once again. He knew this incident would have to be reported to the court. But more than that, he worried about the toll it was taking on Lily. She was a teenager, caught in the middle of a war she hadn't signed up for. Over the next few weeks, Jacob threw himself into creating a sense of stability for Lily. He started attending her school events, helping with her homework, and even taking an interest in her favorite hobbies, something he regretted not doing sooner. They began to bond in a way they hadn't in years, and for the first time since the divorce, Jacob felt like he was starting to win back a piece of his old life. But Abby wasn't done. One evening, Jacob received a letter in the mail, a formal notice that Abby was challenging the custody arrangement. She was claiming that Jacob's long work hours made him an unfit parent, and that Lily had expressed a desire to live with her mother. It was a blatant lie, but it forced Jacob back into the legal arena. His lawyer assured him they had a strong case, but the process was grueling. Depositions, court hearings, and endless paperwork consumed Jacob's time and energy. Every step of the way, Abby seemed intent on making his life as difficult as possible. At one point, she even accused him of hiding assets to avoid paying alimony, a claim that was quickly disproven, but left Jacob fuming. The turning point came during one of the custody hearings. Lily, who had been remarkably mature throughout the ordeal, was called to give her input. Jacob was terrified of what she might say, not because he doubted her loyalty, but because he knew how much pressure she was under. When Lily took the stand, her voice was steady, but filled with emotion. She spoke about how much she loved both her parents, but also about how hard it was to watch them fight. She said she felt safe and supported with her dad, and that while she loved her mum, she didn't always feel like Abby was in a good place to take care of her. By the time Lily finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Jacob felt a swell of pride and heartbreak. At the same time, his daughter was stronger than he'd ever realized. The judge's final ruling reaffirmed Jacob's primary custody, with supervised visits for Abby, until she could demonstrate stability. It wasn't the outcome Abby had wanted, but it was the best one for Lily. As they left the courthouse, Jacob hugged Lily tightly. "You were incredible in there," he said. She smiled up at him, her eyes shining. "I just told the truth." The battle had taken its toll on all of them, but Jacob finally felt like they were turning a corner. With Abby's visits now supervised, the chaos began to subside. Jacob focused on giving Lily the stable, loving home she deserved, and slowly, they began to heal. Don't miss the next part of this gripping story. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to stay updated with more stories like this one. Thanks for watching. Jacob thought the worst was behind him after the court's ruling. Abby's supervised visitation arrangement seemed to bring a semblance of stability back into their lives. Lily, though still adjusting, seemed more at ease. But as Jacob would soon learn, the calm was only temporary, a deceptive pause before the final storm. One evening, Jacob was working on dinner when Lily walked into the kitchen, her face flushed with excitement. "Dad, Mom wants to take me to a concert this weekend. Can I go?" Jacob's heart sank. While the idea of Abby spending quality time with Lily sounded good in theory, her recent behavior made him wary. "Did she mention anything about her supervision?" he asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. Lily shrugged. "She said her supervisor would be there." "It's just a concert. What's the harm?" Jacob hesitated. He didn't want to crush Lily's enthusiasm, but something about the situation felt off. "Let me think about it, okay?" Later that night, Jacob called Abby's assigned supervisor to confirm the arrangement. The woman's response left him cold. Abby had made no request for supervised visitation that weekend. Jacob's stomach twisted in knots. Was Abby planning to take Lily without permission? The next morning, Jacob confronted Abby during their scheduled drop-off. "What's this about the concert?" he asked, his voice firm. Abby rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, Jacob. It's just one night. Do you really think I need a babysitter to take my own daughter to a concert?" "That's not how this works, Abby," Jacob said, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "The court order is clear. If you want to spend time with Lily, you need to follow the rules." Abby's face darkened. "You're unbelievable. All I want is to spend some time with my daughter, and you're making it impossible." "I'm not the one making this hard," Jacob shot back. "You knew what you were getting into when you pulled all those stunts. This is on you." Abby didn't respond, but the anger in her eyes said enough. She stormed off, leaving Jacob with a sinking feeling that this wasn't over. That weekend, Jacob kept a close eye on Lily, wary of any unexpected moves from Abby. Sure enough, Saturday evening rolled around and his phone started buzzing. It was a call from Abby, but he let it go to voicemail. Moments later, a text came through. "I'm outside. Let Lily come with me, or I'll call the cops." Jacob stepped outside to find Abby sitting in her car, glaring at him. "Abby, you need to leave," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I'm not going anywhere without my daughter," she snapped. Jacob felt his patience snap. "You don't get to make demands anymore, Abby. This isn't about you, it's about what's best for Lily." The commotion drew Lily to the doorway. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Jacob turned to her, his heart breaking at the confusion on her face. "Go back inside, sweetheart, I'll handle this." Abby leaned out of her car window. "Lily, don't you want to come with me? We'll have so much fun your dad's just being stubborn." Lily hesitated, torn between her parents. "Mom, I don't think this is a good idea." Abby's face fell, and for a moment, she looked almost defeated, but then her expression hardened. "Fine," she spat, throwing her car into reverse. "You've won this round, Jacob, but don't think for a second that this is over." As Abby sped off, Jacob felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. He had stood his ground, but he knew this wouldn't be the last time Abby tried to push the boundaries. The weeks that followed were tense but quiet. Abby seemed to retreat, sticking to her supervised visits without much complaint. Jacob hoped she was finally starting to accept the situation, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a Friday evening, and Jacob was helping Lily with her science project when his phone buzzed. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but he answered anyway. "Mr. Lawson," a stern voice asked. "This is Officer Daniels with the Denver Police Department. We have your ex-wife in custody. We need you to come down to the station." Jacob's heart raced. What happened? There was an incident at her last visitation. It's better if we discuss it in person. Jacob's mind raced as he drove to the station. When he arrived, Officer Daniels filled him in. During a supervised visit at a local park, Abby had gotten into a heated argument with the supervisor. The argument escalated, and Abby had shoved the woman before attempting to drive off with Lily. Thankfully, the supervisor had managed to intervene, and the police were called before Abby could leave the scene. Jacob's hands shook as he listened to the details. This wasn't just a custody dispute anymore. Abby's actions had crossed a line. Lily, who had been brought to the station for her safety, looked shaken but unharmed. When she saw Jacob, she ran into his arms, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, I didn't know what to do," she sobbed. "It's okay, sweetheart," Jacob said, holding her tightly. "You're safe now." That's all that matters. Abby's arrest was a turning point. The court reviewed her actions and placed further restrictions on her visitation rights. She was ordered to attend counseling and parenting classes before she could see Lily again. For Jacob, it was a bittersweet victory. He was relieved to have more control over the situation, but he couldn't help mourning the family they used to be. In the weeks that followed, Jacob focused on helping Lily heal. They spent more time together, finding new ways to connect and rebuild their bond. Jacob also started therapy, determined to process his own emotions and become the best father he could be. As life slowly returned to a new normal, Jacob found himself reflecting on everything they had been through. The pain, the anger, the heartbreak. It had all been overwhelming, but it had also taught him something important. He had the strength to protect his family, no matter what challenges came their way. And though the scars of the past would never fully fade, Jacob and Lily were ready to face the future together. Thank you for sticking with us through this incredible journey. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories. Your support means the world to us. Jacob could hardly believe how far things had spiraled. Abby's arrest had created a ripple effect, leaving both their lives in a precarious balance. Despite her court-mandated counseling sessions, she seemed more determined than ever to regain control, and Jacob knew the battle was far from over. One evening, Jacob received a call from his lawyer. "Abby's filed an emergency motion for unsupervised visitation," the lawyer said, his tone cautious. "She's arguing that her progress in therapy shows she's fit to parent without supervision." Jacob clenched his fists. Are they seriously considering this after everything she's done? "They're required to hear her case," the lawyer explained, "but we'll make sure the judge knows exactly what's at stake." The hearing was set for the following week. Jacob spent every spare moment gathering evidence to support his case. He compiled detailed records of Abby's erratic behavior, witness statements from the visitation supervisor, and even letters from Lily's teachers praising the stability she'd shown under Jacob's care. Still, the uncertainty gnawed at him. Would the court see through Abby's facade, or would they buy into her promises of change? On the day of the hearing, Jacob walked into the courtroom with a sense of dread. Abby was already there, dressed in a conservative suit, her expression calm and composed. For a moment, Jacob almost doubted himself. Could she really have turned things around? But then he remembered the fear in Lily's eyes the night Abby tried to take her, and his resolve hardened. As the hearing began, Abby's lawyer painted a picture of a remorseful mother who had worked tirelessly to better herself. They presented certificates from her counseling sessions, testimonials from friends, and even a letter from Abby herself, pleading for another chance to be a part of her daughter's life. Jacob's lawyer countered with a detailed account of Abby's past actions, emphasizing the potential risks of granting her unsupervised access to Lily. They highlighted the instability she had demonstrated and argued that Lily's well-being should remain the court's top priority. Then came the most difficult moment. Lily was called to testify. Jacob's heart ached as she took the stand, her small frame dwarfed by the imposing courtroom. She looked nervous but determined. "Lily," the judge began gently, "can you tell us how you feel about spending time with your mother?" Lily hesitated, glancing at Jacob for reassurance. He gave her a small nod. "I love my mom," she said softly, "but sometimes I don't feel safe with her." The courtroom fell silent. Abby's composure cracked for the briefest moment, her eyes welling with tears. Jacob felt a pang of guilt but pushed it aside. This wasn't about sparing Abby's feelings. It was about protecting Lily. The judge thanked Lily for her honesty and excused her from the stand. As she returned to Jacob's side, he whispered, "You were brave, kiddo. I'm proud of you." After hours of testimony and deliberation, the judge delivered their ruling. Abby's motion for unsupervised visitation was denied. She would remain under supervised arrangements until she could demonstrate consistent progress over a longer period. Abby's reaction was a mix of anger and devastation. She glared at Jacob as the courtroom emptied, her eyes burning with unspoken accusations. But Jacob didn't flinch. He had fought too hard to waver now. In the days that followed, life began to settle into a new routine. Jacob threw himself into being the best father he could be, cherishing every moment with Lily. They went on hikes, watched movies, and even tackled a DIY home improvement project together. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. But it was real, and it was theirs. Then, one afternoon, Jacob received an unexpected visitor. Abby showed up at his door, looking more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. She wasn't angry or combative, just tired. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. Jacob hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. They sat at the kitchen table, the air thick with tension. "I'm not here to fight," Abby began. I wanted to apologize." Jacob raised an eyebrow, unsure of what to say. Abby continued, her voice trembling. "I've made a lot of mistakes, I know that, and I know I've hurt you and Lily in ways I can't take back. But I'm trying, Jacob. I really am." Jacob studied her face, searching for signs of manipulation, but all he saw was sincerity. "Why now?" he asked cautiously. Abby sighed. "Because I'm tired of fighting, and because I miss my daughter. I know I have a long way to go, but I want to be better. For her." For the first time in months, Jacob felt a flicker of hope. He didn't fully trust Abby. Not yet. But he wanted to believe she could change. For Lily's sake, he was willing to try. They agreed to start small, working together to rebuild some semblance of a co-parenting relationship. It wasn't easy, and there were plenty of setbacks, but over time, they found a fragile truce. Abby adhered to her supervised visitation schedule without complaint, and Jacob began to see glimpses of the woman he had once loved. One evening, as Jacob and Lily sat on the porch watching the sunset, she turned to him with a smile. "You know, Dad, I think we're going to be okay." Jacob wrapped an arm around her shoulders, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "Yeah, kiddo, I think we are." Thank you for watching and sticking with us through this incredible story. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more compelling tales, like this one. Your support means the world. The weeks that followed marked a new chapter for Jacob and Lily. The turbulence of the past months had finally started to settle, leaving room for healing and growth. While the scars of their journey remained, they were no longer weighed down by the constant battle with Abby's unpredictability. Instead, they focused on building a future rooted in trust, love, and the lessons they had learned along the way. Jacob noticed subtle but important changes in himself. He had always considered himself a hard worker and a devoted father, but this ordeal had forced him to reassess what it meant to be truly present. He wasn't just going through the motions anymore. He was engaged, mindful, and intentional about every moment he spent with Lily. The bond they had forged during their trials was stronger than ever. Abby, too, began to show signs of transformation. While their relationship was far from what it once was, she seemed genuinely committed to her recovery and to rebuilding her connection with Lily. She attended her counseling sessions consistently and worked hard to prove to the court, and to Jacob, that she could be a stable presence in her daughter's life. One pivotal moment came during Lily's school play. It was her first major performance, and she had been practicing for weeks. Both Jacob and Abby were in the audience, sitting on opposite sides of the auditorium, but united in their pride for Lily. As Lily delivered her lines, Jacob caught Abby wiping away tears. For the first time in what felt like forever, he saw a glimpse of the Abby he had fallen in love with all those years ago. It was bittersweet, but it gave him hope that they could continue moving forward, even if only as co-parents. The turning point in their journey came during a mediation session arranged by the court. It was the first time Jacob and Abby had sat down together with a neutral party to discuss their parenting plan. The session was tense at first, with old wounds threatening to surface, but they eventually found common ground. "I know I've made things harder for everyone," Abby admitted, her voice trembling. "But I want to be better, not just for Lily but for myself." Jacob nodded, his own emotions close to the surface. "I want the same thing for Lily, to have both her parents in her life, but it has to be safe and healthy for her." The mediator helped them craft a new agreement that allowed Abby to gradually transition to unsupervised visits, contingent on her continued progress in therapy. It was a compromise that required trust, a trust Jacob wasn't sure he could fully extend yet, but one he was willing to work toward for Lily's sake. In the months that followed, the rhythm of their lives began to stabilize. Abby adhered to the plan, and while there were occasional missteps, her efforts were clear. Lily, for her part, flourished in the newfound calm. She excelled in school, deepened her friendships, and even started mentoring younger students in her drama club. One sunny afternoon, Jacob and Lily were sitting in the backyard, enjoying a rare moment of quiet. Lily had brought out her sketchbook and was doodling, while Jacob sipped on a cup of coffee. "Dad," Lily said suddenly, breaking the silence, "do you ever think about what it would have been like if things were different, if you and Mom hadn't split up?" Jacob set down his cup, taking a moment to think. "I do," he admitted. "But then I remind myself that some things happen for a reason. Your mom and I, we weren't in a good place. Staying together wouldn't have been healthy for anyone, especially you." Lily nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I think you're right. It's been hard, but I feel like we're all starting to figure it out." Jacob smiled, reaching over to ruffle her hair. "You're a wise kid, you know that?" As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, life began to feel normal again. Jacob continued to find joy in the small moments, cooking dinner with Lily, tinkering with his car, and even taking up a new hobby, woodworking. It wasn't something he ever thought he'd try, but there was something therapeutic about building something from scratch, watching it take shape, piece by piece. Abby remained a part of their lives, though in a much more measured way. She and Lily spent time together regularly, and while the relationship was still a work in progress, it was clear they were rebuilding trust. Jacob had even started to feel comfortable having brief, amicable conversations with Abby during drop-offs and pickups. One evening, as Jacob was cleaning up after dinner, Lily came into the kitchen with her phone in hand. "Dad, look at this," she said, showing him a video she had taken of their dog chasing its tail in the yard. The two of them laughed, and Lily's eyes sparkled with the kind of happiness Jacob hadn't seen in a long time. "You know," Jacob said, setting down the dish he was washing, "we've come a long way, haven't we?" Lily nodded. "Yeah, and I think we're going to be okay." Jacob smiled, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. It hadn't been an easy journey, but it had been worth it. He had fought for his family, and in the process, he had rediscovered what truly mattered. As the sun set on their quiet suburban street, Jacob felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The road ahead might still have its challenges, but for the first time in a long time, he was ready to face them, with Lily by his side. And that's the end of this emotional and inspiring journey. Thank you for staying with us through every twist and turn of this story. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories. Like this one. Your support helps us bring these tales to life, so hit that subscribe button and join us for the next adventure. See you soon.